Triangle strategy was a nice little surprise on announcement. Now that the dust has settled in a post-Elden Ring world, I took the time to check out this brand new strategy RPG. It's been a long while since Square Enix has made anything like this, so let's see if they still got the chops to do so. Using their 2D HD style from Octopath Traveler before it, Triangle Strategy is an attractive game. Mixing a nostalgic feeling of 2D sprite work with old-school background aesthetic, it's once again a warm and cozy blanket of visuals to behold. Toss in some modern flair for effects and lighting, and this game just really pops. But while I inherently love the look of this game, it isn't perfect. On the default settings, I found the game to be pretty strenuous to look at personally. With things like blur maxed out and a wild depth of field, my eyes were definitely thanking me for turning down or disabling some of the effects, which can be done at any time.
Are we just dogs to answer his beck and call?
My lady. Please, I understand.
I should also mention the voice acting.
We have no choice.
It's a choice, to say the least.
I know this.
There's definitely a variety of
apologize.
quality here, ranging
It's
from
just
good and bad. It's
There are
serviceable,
things we
but
must
many
protect.
lines are read incredibly
Things
dry
I
and
must
stiff.
protect.
It's partly down to the
Lest we lose
script,
what
but
makes us
also the
human.
performances. It's hard to describe, but given the subject matter, some of the lines are supposed to be read with vigor and personality. But instead, they come across as more someone trying to read with exact pronunciation in lieu of selling the moment. It's definitely hit or miss, but there are some side characters who absolutely kill it, while some of the main ones leave a lot to be desired. Probably my favorite part of the game, though, is the story. Of course, it's an RPG, so it's the main focus of the experience, but I can immediately say, it's not for everyone. Triangle Strategy is all about political intrigue. Instead of more fantasy elements of something like Final Fantasy Tactics or Fire Emblem, Triangle plays things a bit more serious, focusing on conflicts of land, resources, and even political screwballing. If you love any of these aspects in your plot, there's definitely a lot to chew on and enjoy. But for those hoping for a little more spice through monsters and ancient magical prophecies and the like, you might be left a little disappointed. As someone whose favorite Final Fantasy titles are 12 and Tactics, I personally really enjoyed the subject matter here. I will say some more fanciful elements would have been interesting, but once the plot gets up to speed, it becomes really compelling, even with those elements being minimal. Like I just hinted at, the story is a bit long-winded, especially in the beginning. There can be what feels like very long stretches of pure exposition over actual combat or town exploration. It levels out pretty well after the opening's major plot points are revealed, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't rough. In the opening 3 hours, I think there was something like 2 or 3 battles, one of those being the tutorial. After that, however, the dialogue moments become a bit more manageable, along with more battles to break things up, thankfully. The story is made even more interesting thanks to the various choices that you make. At its core, it's a simple choose-your-own-path situation, but they were a joy to see. Your choice can affect the characters, places, and events that you experience. Even better is the characters each have their own personalities and thoughts on the situations that you see. So when the opportunity to choose a major path arises, you have to persuade them to choose the path that you want to go along with. This persuasion system is done with scales. Each member votes towards a particular choice, and the winning vote is the next course of action for the plot. In the event of a tie, the player themselves can openly choose. It's an interesting part of the game, if not a bit convoluted. Sometimes talking to various NPCs nets extra conversation options, but it's still up to the player to make the right choices to sway members who are not going to vote your way. Personally, I wasn't bothered too much by this system, but I still tried to choose based on what I would be thinking in the moment. Many of the options tend to be loose choices with no real correct answer. My first time through, I wasn't really worried about where I'd go or who I'd meet, and I just wanted to enjoy the ride. As for the rest of the gameplay, if you played an SRPG before, you'll be right at home. Each battle is turn-based and plays out between moving units and attacking or doing abilities. At its core, it keeps things really basic, and I absolutely love that. Because this genre isn't exactly spitting out games every week, I much prefer a really simple style compared to something that's meant to be extremely innovative or experimental. However, Triangle isn't without its own spice. There's a surprising amount of field effects that can be triggered. By using abilities, items, or interactables on the map, the terrain can be affected in various ways. For example, using lightning on a puddle of water will chain it to all others around it, making for really insane field moments. They can even be chained together or cancelled with certain uses. For example, a field can be lit on fire, adding damage, then frozen to turn it into a puddle of water, and then hit it with lightning to create more damage. It's a super interesting way to mix things up, and I really enjoyed seeing it. It adds a lot of strategy to combat too, and thankfully the game pushes just enough that experimenting with interesting combinations is rewarding, but it doesn't require the player to be operating at a 1000% galaxy brain at all times. Not to mention there are several difficulty options to tailor it to your own mood. There are also classes for each character. Instead of having a generic unit take up a role, they are all unique. As they level up and you find resources, they can be upgraded. This of course gives stat boosts and a variety of new abilities to complement their style, as well as a slight alteration of their appearance. It's interesting, but once again, it's nothing we haven't seen before. In all, Triangle strategy keeps things quite traditional, but interesting at the same time. Much like Octopath, it opts to revel in the classic elements of its genre. Its combat is familiar and interesting, but not without its own unique takes on some background mechanics. The story can be hit or miss depending on how much you like overly dramatic political landscape tales, but for those of us who are into it, there's much to enjoy. And of course, the 2D HD presentation is always a charm to look at. Triangle Strategy is one of those games that really hits home for those of us who are into the genre. While it's not perfect and a little long-winded at the beginning, it's an easy recommendation for those of us who are well indoctrinated into the SRPG world. For anyone else, I'd say give it a think and decide if it's something you'd be willing to try to sink your teeth into.
Zana, was it?
And that's all for this review. What did you think? Is Triangle Strategy something you're into? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Is it something you recommend to others? Let me know down below. And I hope to see you again next time. Be sure to like, follow, and even check in on my Twitch page where I stream games like this and more every week.
You won't beat me!